Hello. So hari ni kita main Assassin's Creed Origin. Tapi hari ni kita bukan nak main game lah. Kita nak belajar asyik main game je kan. So pada siapa yang tak tahu kan, maybe yang tak main game ni, Assassin's Creed Origin dia ada macam untuk belajar history sejarah Mesir Purba, yang boleh kata macam a bit accurate lah dia punya apa yang dia buat masa zaman tu. So aku tak pernah tengok lagi benda ni, so apa kita try tengok lah. Aku tak sure aku dah buat ke belum, tapi kita reset je. Aku rasa aku tak pernah main lagi. So benda ni discovery tour di ya.
Welcome to Discovery Tour by Assassin's Creed, Ancient Egypt.
Aku rasa idea macam ni menarik lah untuk game, sebab sekarang game makin lama dia makin accurate kan. And why not kau buat macam ni. Contoh untuk game ni yang kau boleh belajar sekali lah apa sejarah dia sebenarnya. And aku rasa selain tu macam dia buat kau lagi enjoy lah game tu, sebab aku rasa immersive sikit lah. Kau boleh faham apa, kenapa benda tu ada kat situ. Contohnya lah, apa teknologi zaman tu ke. So interesting lah aku rasa. Okay. Sebelum orang tanya aku, so baik aku cakap lah. Nanti orang tanya kan, apa spek-spek kan. So aku beritahu spek sekarang aku pakai is processor aku pakai AMD Ryzen 1600X, and graphic card aku pakai GTX 1060 Aorus Extreme lah, yang 6GB punya. So spek wise aku rasa cukup lah, macam kau tak perlu gila babi sangat. Okay, City of Alexandria.
Welcome to Alexandria, planning of the city. Alexander's plan to build his great city began with a verse from Homer's Odyssey. There is, in front of Egypt, in the sea with many swells, an island called Pharos. Guided by these clues, Alexander the Great founded his future city at the western end of the Nile Delta.
Okay, ni cerita pasal Alexander the Great. Okay, so apa aku boleh buat? Just continue jalan.
Though Alexander considered this location ideal for his great city, it presented considerable challenges. Too difficult to access during storms, the surrounding swamps threatened disease, and the limestone soil prevented the growth of healthy crops. However, due to the influence of his mentor Aristotle, Alexander the Great recognized that the true value was its strategic emplacement. Alexander knew that in controlling Pelusium to the east, Memphis to the south, and his crowning glory Alexandria to the west, he would create a triangular stronghold, allowing him to control the entire delta while giving him access to the Mediterranean.
Okay. Tapi aku rasa konten ni bukan untuk semua orang lah. Maybe ada
The
yang
great
sebosan ke apa
walls
kan.
of Alexandria had a humble
ya,
beginning.
sejarah
Lacking chalk to
proses
outline
for
the
everyone
future
lah. Tapi
city's
kalau siapa yang enjoy,
foundations, architects were
boleh
forced to
lah
use flour
enjoy,
instead.
continue tengok video ni.
Clouds of migrating birds swept down and ate the flour, erasing the plans. This prompted Alexander to seek guidance from the oracles, who reassured him that his future city was destined to feed a large population. Excavations led by Mahmud Bey el-Falaki in the 19th century revealed that the wall enclosure measured approximately 5.2 kilometers in length and 2.2 kilometers in width. It was roughly 9 meters in height.
Aku sebenarnya impressed dengan dia punya level of detail. Sebab dia buat nak very true
These
to
formidable ancient walls would resist a number of attacks, including fending off the king of Syria in 169 BCE. It wasn't until 295 CE that they eventually fell to Roman Emperor Diocletian, and this only after 8 months of relentless assault.
Tapi impressive gila tu kalau macam memang zaman dulu macam ni kan. Macam dia punya capability untuk build kota yang sangat agung.
Alexandria's principal architect, Dinocrates, chose a Hippodamian grid plan. The grid maximized functionality, with wide straight roads and canals running beneath them. Alexander recognized the military value of the city's design. The wide parallel streets gave him optimal surveillance of the city while allowing the unobstructed flow of troops.
Okay. Tak tahulah how many percentage benda ni true.
A central corridor ran from the Mediterranean's
at
north
this point,
port
aku rasa
down to
very
Lake
impressive.
Mareotis to the south. This thoroughfare acted as an unobstructed link for commercial trade and travel between the two ports. Many of the streets were bordered with grand buildings and parks, including Canopic Street, with its impressive gate bordering the eastern end.
So kalau mak bapak kau asyik bising kau main game kan, kau tunjuk lah benda ni. Kau cakap nak ada main game, tengah belajar sejarah Mesir Purba.
Alexandria was most
Baru lah
likely
boleh.
built upon an already existing
Baru
Egyptian
odds.
village. Upon its completion, the Egyptians reviled the city, refusing to call it by its founder's name. Instead, they called it Raked, the building, as a mark of disdain, which was later Hellenized into Rakotis. Despite this, the name Alexandria would remain.
Okay, aku dah habis. Tu je. Oh, boleh pilih tour lain. Okay. Okay, soalan. Alexandria the Great ni Iskandar ke? Oh, Julius Caesar. Okay. And Pharaoh is Fir'aun, is it? Ke? Oh, tak. Oh, aku boleh pilih karakter. Oh. Wow. Okay. Baik, ni karakter dalam game ni lah. So Pharaoh. Ya, Pharaoh is Fir'aun kan. Itulah. Okay, aku nak pakai tu. Kita belajar. Aku rasa hari ni kita tengok ada punya ni lah. Daily life. Okay. See. Oh, ni lah timeline dia. Piramid ni dalam cerita ni lah. Naik ada museum Tutankhamun dengan Ramses. Tak silap aku lah. Alexander the Great, Cleopatra. Oh, so ni is... Sekarang kita kat mana timeline dia? Alexander the Great. Okay. 664 BC. Ada foto mod F3. Okay, kita cuba buat sorry Okay, kita cuba buat dia punya ni daily life dia. Kita tengok sikit apa sejarah mummy. Oh, dia macam tu je. Dia kan tua. Okay. Aku nak cek yang tua tadi lah. Macam mana aku nak pergi tadi? Oh, dah ada banyak kat sebenarnya. Tak apa kau belajar. Tapi aku nak pergi tengok ni juga. Daily life dia. Okay, boleh fast travel. Of iron from a meteorite. I don't know.
Welcome to Osiris, the first mummy. The oldest mummies recovered date from the Old Kingdom, though Egyptologists believe that mummification was in use much earlier than that. At first, the body was mummified through environmental desiccation, by leveraging the dryness of the environment and the heat of the climate. Early experimentations in mummification were conducted with the use of resin made from tree sap. Strips of linen were only used on some superficial parts of the epidermis of the hands or jaw. Ideologically, the will to preserve the body is not explained in any way until 3600 BCE. This is when the Egyptian belief that the body housed the soul was finally documented for modern Egyptologists to eventually decipher. It was not until the arrival of the myth of Osiris in the Egyptian religion around the 5th dynasty that mummification was thoroughly conceptualized. The practice was thereafter grounded in both a mythological and ideological point of view.
Aku tak sure ada detail ni semua accurate ke apa. Tapi kalau a little bit accurate pun aku rasa macam damn, dia punya attention to detail tu gila babi lah. Macam mana aku nak ambil photo mode tadi ya? F2 Aku asyik lupa je tu. Okay, tak apa lah.
Osiris was mainly known as the god of the dead and the god of resurrection. The most well-known Genesis myth concerning Osiris is that of his dismemberment. It is Plutarch who gives the most simplified and complete summary of the story. Within Egyptian mythology, Osiris represented the first king to rule Egypt. Jealous of his power, his brother Seth attempted to usurp his throne. After several unsuccessful attempts, Seth succeeded in killing his brother by dismembering him and scattering the pieces of his body all over Egypt. Isis, the great of magic, traveled all over Egypt in search of the pieces of her husband's body. After a long search, she recovered all the pieces save for his manhood, as it was eaten by a fish. Iset then reassembled the body of her husband by binding it together with strips of linen. Aided by her sister Nephthys, another powerful magician, they gave Osiris the breath of life. This not only brought him back from the dead, but also allowed him to recover his virility long enough to impregnate Iset, thus ensuring his succession before, once more, dying. Thus Horus was born. The ritual used to bring Osiris back to life essentially depicts how he became the first mummy. It is why, on the sarcophagi of kings, we often find Iset and Nephthys represented as the magicians who restore life to the deceased.
Okay, dah habis. Kalau siapa yang tak main game ni kan, benda ni pun actually the actual in-game punya map lah. So betul lah, dia buat kau lagi macam immersive lah, and lagi appreciate apa yang developer ni semua dah buat. Tak boleh pakai kuda lah. Boleh lah. Naik kuda jap.
Whoa! Yeah.
Okay, kita tengok jap. Mummies process. Jauh tak? Fuh, detail gila. This is already informative. Aku pergi The Loft pun tengok pasal mummy pun tak faham apa. So ni macam lagi bagus lah. Daripada kau pergi museum kan, tak siapa nak explain kan kau. Ni macam lagi interaktif. So aku suka lah. Aku suka idea ni. Gelap. Aku nak tengok ada satu benda yang aku interested nak tengok. Ni agriculture. Sebab aku macam interested nak tengok apa teknologi dulu dia buat. And masa zaman dulu pun dah kira macam canggih ke lah. Kita tengok Kita belajar sistem macam mana diorang bercocok tanam zaman dulu. Okay, let's go.
Welcome to Agriculture and Seasons. While crops were cultivated in different oases around the desert, most of the arable lands were near the Nile. Two types of cereal grain were cultivated, barley and an ancient wheat known as emmer. These two key ingredients contributed in establishing bread and beer as the staple of the Egyptian diet and the basis of its economy. The Ptolemaic era created an agricultural revolution with the introduction of advanced agricultural techniques and new grain types such as rice, durum wheat, and pearl millet. The resulting agricultural mass production greatly increased the economy of ancient Egypt. It also prompted the development of storage and transportation, allowing long-distance trade with other regions.
Aku interested nak tahu sebenarnya apa politik Egypt dulu ni. Sebab dia basically Firaun. So aku assume macam dictator lah. Tapi aku macam the way dia manage very organised lah.
C'est Ab Kamer. Oh, ouais, Rassou. Mine,
Lompat. Tak lompat lagi. Dah jalan sini. Ke bawah. Gue naik ke bawah. Tak boleh.
Both bread and beer rations were part of a system of barter payment. The state used those goods to pay wages for those who worked in the quarries and at the construction sites. Beer was so important to ancient Egyptians, they had a goddess of beer brewing, Tenenet. Tenenet is seen in many paintings and sculptures with beer, and
Tenenet.
women are depicted as the primary beer makers.
Mana orang pergi?
In order to increase agricultural production, fertile land was divided into plots and large agricultural villages were encouraged. The state and temples were the biggest landowners. Depending on the region, fertile land was managed by civil servants or rented to individuals. Ancient Egyptians relied on rudimentary tools for land cultivation. Soil was broken down with hoes, and wing plows were used to make furrows. The three seasons known as Akhet, Peret, and Shemu corresponded to a specific phase of the agricultural process and the river's natural changes. Akhet was the time of the flood, beginning with the appearance of the star Sirius in July. Peret was the time when lands were cultivated, plowed, and sown. This
Oh,
fell
tapi dia
between
memang lawa.
October and November.
Baik.
Shemu ran from May to September and was when harvesting and taxation began.
Dia tak beritahu ni sebenarnya rumah untuk apa. Kalau beritahu macam interesting. Ini tempat storage kot. Tak ada masuk Saya tak tahu apa benda function dia. Kenapa rumah ni sengaja dibanjirkan. Memang tak nak lompat ke? Ada orang tukar ke bunyi ni? Oh, minta gambar. Kapal burung tu tak gerak. Apakah yang sedang berlaku? Tak apalah. Malas pula aku. Macam lagi-lagi sikit lah. Tapi lawa babe. Macam real. Oh, dia memang tutup. I mean, dia memang pause. Full Lama. Macam jalan-jalan. Okay, jom.
The pharaoh's duty was to uphold order against chaos and provide for his people. Priests and local governors also wanted to appear as protectors of the people. However, any variation in the Nile's seasons could cause water shortages. This had devastating consequences on wheat and barley crops. The pharaoh, administrators, and priests knew they needed to demonstrate their ability to prevent such a catastrophe from happening. And so they invented the story, which would be inscribed upon the famine stela. The story begins with the pharaoh worried for his people. The Nile hasn't flooded in years, and his people are starving. In search of the origins of the flooding, Djoser seeks out Khnum, the protector god of the region and the source of the drought. Djoser gives the god offerings and orders his priests to restore the temple of Khnum. These offerings please the god, and the floods are restored. This story was intended to highlight the importance of the deity in everyone's daily lives, while also demonstrating the crucial role that the priests and the king played in feeding and protecting the people of Egypt.
Okay. Sudah habis. Tapi part ni macam disappointed sikit lah. Sebab mesti boleh buat lagi best. Sebab dia tak ui, paha ada buaya. Sebab dia tak cerita macam detail pun macam mana. Tak, I mean aku macam nak tahu lah lagi detail apa dia punya sistem dia ke, macam mana dia buat, dia jaga air ni, macam mana air ni sampai kat sini, macam mana dia ambil Sungai Nil tu hantar ke sini. Ya, sebab dulu mana ada pump. So macam dia pakai sistem apa, faham tak? Tapi aku rasa ada kot. Ni okay, jom kita tengah tengok. Alexandra.
Welcome to ancient Egyptian cultivation.
Oh, aku rasa kat sini kot dia cerita. Yelah tu. Macam mana sistem irigasi dia.
The new grain types of the Ptolemaic period required a great deal of water. Farmers needed to ensure they had effective, consistent irrigation. The Nile's rising and receding waters naturally irrigated most of the crops. Areas where the Nile didn't reach, such as gardens and vegetable plots, required an irrigation tool known as the shadoof. The shadoof allowed easy transport of water from its source. It consisted of a tall wooden frame with a long pivoting pole and suspended bucket. The system could be raised and lowered with little effort.
Lepas tu manually kena angkat air tu. Tak ada demo ke? Oh, tak ada. Tapi aku assume dia cakap letak batu tu supaya senang lah. Macam aku tak payah put effort untuk naikkan air. Sebab dah ada pemberat. So basically it. So dia naik atas ni, lepas tu dia angkat naik atas lagi. Leceh gak lah. Tapi betul lah dulu kan.
Later, a sakya, or water wheel, was invented. The sakya needed animals to turn the wheel, which rotated buckets through the water. It drew the water to an elevation of 3.5 meters, and enabled a great deal of control over the irrigation process. This improvement supplied larger areas and thus resulted in larger harvests.
Okay. Tapi mana yang wheel punya sistem tu? Shadow.
The threshing process separated the grain from its husk. Workers would spread the ears on clean ground. Oxen, cows, or donkeys were then guided back and forth to trample the grain. This continuous movement worked the grain loose while preventing the animals from eating it. Unwanted chaff and straw were swept away, or gathered and added to the mud used to make bricks, to make them stronger.
Okay, so aku assume tu dia punya proses untuk wheat tadi tu. Oh, kita tekan lah. Sorry. Kenapa aku buat jadi malam? Mana ada orang kerja malam? Baik, dia orang kerja malam. Okay.
Winnowing was the stage where workers used wooden scoops to throw ears in the air.
Yo.
The wind carried off the chaff, leaving the heavier seeds to fall to the ground.
Baru sampai ke apa?
This action was repeated
Oh, betul
until the
sebagai ampang lah.
undesired materials were sifted out. Grain waste was mixed with manure or other organic substances to produce brick-shaped dung loaves that could be easily burned. A standardized brick size enabled Egyptians to mass-produce this byproduct and use it as a commodity.
Asal lah? Aku nak keluar ke apa? Aku nak keluar ke apa? Hah? Oh, okay lah. 9 lah, 9.
Transporting large amounts of grain required ships equipped to carry heavy loads. These goods were moved during the Nile's flooding season, when the river was deep enough for large ships. The transports stopped at checkpoints to accommodate customs and police controls, as well as for technical requirements and weather conditions.
Apa? Advance gila. Tak suka lah malam ni. Macam mana aku nak buat siang balik? What? Itu kat jalan. Okay, ni boleh naik ni. Mati lah kau. Aku nak naik kat situ. Beda.
Having reached Alexandria's inner harbor, the wheat was unloaded under the supervision of a civil servant in charge of wheat management. Portions were distributed to Alexandria's city market, and the remaining stockpile was either exported or stored in warehouses.
Very organized. Dia ada wheat management. Orang yang manage specifically. Aku tak cerita pun ni apa, tapi aku rasa ni storage je. Simpan.
Grain storage facilities were located across all of Egypt. Temples and institutions had large silos, while individual houses had storage sheds. In some houses, arched cellars were built into the foundations. These watertight chambers were accessible from the ground floor through a trapdoor. Royal granaries acted as the storehouse and distribution centers, and managed state payments to civil servants, soldiers, and the police. Though plastered on the inside, silos weren't completely sealed, and so remained susceptible to mice infestations. When the grain was ready for processing, it was poured into bowls and pounded into a coarse flour. That flour was then passed through a sieve to make it of finer quality and further ground between stones. Ancient Egyptians did not stock flour. Instead, fresh grain was portioned out each time to produce flour as it was needed.
Wow. Fresh.
The sieves used by ancient Egyptians were unable to filter out sand and stones. Grit often passed into the flour, causing long-term tooth abrasions among all classes of Egyptians.
Now you know.
Whoa! Whoa!
Tak payah pergi pun tak apa. Fast control je. Okay, ni macam interesting. Kita buat ni lah. Maybe ni last lah untuk episod kali ini. The making of beer and bread.
Welcome to Bread and Beer. While the Mesopotamians invented beer, including using a straw to avoid the sediments and herbs, ancient Egyptians perfected the brewing method. Egyptian beer's quality was determined by alcohol strength, color, and flavor. During the Pharaonic era, beer was the most commonly used and important alcoholic beverage. The state and temples used it, along with bread, as payment to workers, and it was included on the lists of food offerings to the gods and the deceased.
Senang macam kita guys. Pergi museum ambil gambar kan. Dengan proses-proses buat beer.
Beer was the popular drink of ceremonies and festivals. The festival of drunkenness was even dedicated to it. Considered to be quite nutritional, beer was also significant in the day-to-day lives of ancient Egyptians. Egyptian adults and children consumed beer with all of their meals, and medical texts include hundreds of remedies that contain beer. It remained the most popular alcoholic beverage until the Roman era. Recipes for beer varied over time and depended on the quality of the materials. Bakers and brewers typically worked alongside one another at the same workshop or house. Many families often produced the quantity appropriate to their own consumption, with better quality beers produced for festivals and other special occasions.
Kotor.
The most basic recipe used malted cereal as the main ingredient. Fruits such as dates were added along with honey and spices. Once baked, bread would be crumbled into the brew to start the fermentation process. Adding grain enzymes would break down the starches, turning them into sugar and creating a thick mash. Once ready, the bread and grain mixture was compressed and then strained through a sieve with water into the mix of malt beer. Once fermented, the beer mash was transferred to large containers and again compressed by foot or with pestles. Once smooth, the beer was stored in pottery jars and sealed with a clay stopper. It probably couldn't be kept for long and likely had a thick, pasty appearance and texture. Very little was wasted. Leftover grains were reused to make sourdough bread or combined with the next batch of beer. While there are many ancient accounts for making bread, most of the knowledge known about ancient Egyptian brewing comes from an account by the alchemist Zosimus over 300 years after Cleopatra's reign. More recently, Dr. Delwyn Samuel, an archaeobotanist, has proposed alternate antique techniques to brew beer. However, experts are unable to replicate an authentic beer since not all of the techniques and ingredients used by ancient Egyptians are known yet. Food was prepared on the floor until the Middle Kingdom, when cooking benches were introduced. The introduction of durum wheat improved bread quality, meaning that the upper and middle classes ate better. The poor, however, still made do with a diet consisting of a gruel made of vegetables, softened bread, or barley.
Okay. Very informative, serious.
Dough was kneaded by hand or foot, and when sufficiently blended, additional items were added, such as fruits, nuts, honey, and spices. To leaven the bread, they added sourdough or leaven from beer brewing. Ovens were circular or beehive-shaped and made with clay or brick. Ancient Egyptians always had to fight off the omnipresent sand particles that were blown towards them. Despite their best efforts, sand regularly made its way into their food. Additionally, particles from the grain-grinding stone tools and ovens they used also contributed to attrition and prematurely worn teeth. The team tried to portray this through toothache animations and commoners sweeping sand off.
Habis sudah. Interesting. Aku rasa siapa yang ada game ni boleh try Discovery Tour ni. At least ada faedah sikit main game. Sebab aku rasa very interesting very very informative. So aku rasa setakat ni sajalah untuk kali ini. Kita bertemu di masa hadapan. Lawa ambil gambar.
Whoa!
Focus point. Okay. So itu aja. Kita jumpa next time. Ciao.